You're listening to a Defining Moments Canada conversation with Dr. Donna Strickland, Professor of Physics at the University of Waterloo and laureate of the 2018 Nobel Prize for Physics, recognized for her development of chirp pulse amplification, CPA, in 1985. Dr. Strickland sat down with me, Louis Lebel, Digital Content Manager at DMC, to discuss the Nobel Prize and what it meant to her and to Canadian science. This conversation happened in the context of Defining Moment Canada's NobelCanadian Commemorative Project, a digital space to recognize Canadian Nobel laureates, their achievements, and their deep imprint on this country. I'll begin just reading them off. The first question being, is there anything specific about your background or education that you think is a must mention when telling your story?
Well, I think as a Canadian, we should be very proud of our public education system. I think that I had a very good education, and I wouldn't like to see that changed. I think in this world of trying to get equal playing fields for everybody, I think the Canadian public education system really helps with that. I have been in a country where during the question period, I was asked by a young woman, do you think somebody with a public education system schooling can make it as far as a Nobel Prize? And my answer had to be, I'm sorry, but I come from Canada, where well over 90% have a public education system, and it's a good education. And so I don't know where your question's coming from, but I would hate Canada to ever lose out on that and start going down, having more and more private education and having a two-tiered system. I'm very proud of our Canadian public education system.
Do you mind if I ask you where you're from and kind of where you went to school?
Sure. I'm from Guelph, Ontario, so it's a mid-sized city. But I also, when people talk about my education, I grew up with my two parents who were basically sort of the first generation to go to university in their family. My dad's brother, he was in Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia. This would have been in the 40s. And they didn't even have the final year of high school. They really didn't think anybody in their whole town would go to university. And I guess he was so smart that his teacher said, this is wrong. I will get the correspondence thing and I will work with you and we're going to get you to university. And the banker's wife funded him to go because my dad's family was quite poor now, and he paid them back. So that when my dad went 2 years later, they did have the final year of high school. So he didn't have to jump through the hoops that his brother did, but it was still rare for these guys to go off to university. And my mother grew up in a small farming village of 1,000 people in Ontario. And her brother, who was the oldest, took over the farm, and she and her sister were the two that went off to university. So even as a female, she went off. I think her older sister wanted to be a doctor, and she decided no, she would be a nurse like a good woman. And she, I think she and others told my mom, don't do science, even though you want to do math, don't do it, do arts. And so she did arts. Right. So I was told the whole time growing up by my mother, don't let anybody else tell you what to do. You do what you want to do, because I would have been a better math teacher than an English teacher. She was good at English too. She corrected my letters and red inked them all because she was disappointed how poor my spelling and grammar was. She was a more well-rounded student than I was. So I had that in my background, right? I wouldn't say I was pushed. It was much more an implied that their children would go on to university.
Yeah, kind of maybe a deeper understanding of the value of education because of how not difficult, but new it was for them. They were able.
Exactly.
That's such a wonderful. It's interesting to see. We work in education and creating pedagogical tools, and that's kind of our MO here at Defining Moments. And just to see these stories and to hear teachers talk about kind of these journeys that people go through, I think is really inspiring, and that anyone could really achieve things is something really special to see, I think. And that's nice to hear from you, sir. I think that's really interesting too, your uncle with the last year of high school. Imagine being the only one in the last year of high school in the whole town.
Exactly. So.
That's wonderful. Can you tell me a bit, so you won the Nobel Prize it's 2018, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit what your reaction was to that, and what the reaction of your entourage, your family, your colleagues, your students, kind of?
Well, sure. So in Eastern time zones, you get the call at 5 in the morning, right? So again, the first reaction when you're woken up, I'm not awake at 5 a.m, is something is wrong, right? It was the landline, and my husband picked up, and he hands me the phone saying they're asking for Professor Strickland. Again, you think, oh, fire in the lab. And all they said was it was a woman on the phone saying, please stay on the line. It's a very important call from Sweden. So at that point, I'm hanging on to my husband going, it's October 2nd, it's 5 a.m, and they're calling from Sweden. I think I've maybe won the Nobel Prize, and which is sort of a disbelief and excitement. It's sort of a combination of these two things. Unfortunately, they had actually hung up on me by mistake. And I kept on the phone, and I am a rules follower. And so I stayed on the phone for 15 minutes. I thought, is this just a bad joke? What is this? And so finally, when I looked at my email, there was an email saying, we are desperately trying to call you, because of course they couldn't get through. My line was busy. And please call us. And so the email had come from the Royal Swedish Academy. So I kind of knew when I was calling that it was indeed the Nobel Prize. So I called them and they let me know. And so then I was excited. So now on to my family. This is now just after 5 a.m. I text 4 people, my sister, my brother, my son, and my daughter. And the funniest reaction was my daughter. So at 7:30 in the morning, I get a call from my daughter. She said, Mom, you've won the Nobel Prize. And I said, I think I told you that, Hannah. And she goes, I know, but when I got the text from you, I thought your phone was hacked. So and then her girlfriend who knew me called and said, that's really great news about your mother. And she said, no, I think my mom's phone's been hacked. She said, it's on the news, Hannah. And then Hannah got on, I don't know, Googled it or something. And that's when she saw it. And that's when she called me. And she said, so then I knew, Mom, you had won the Nobel Prize. I went, well, thanks for not believing me that you couldn't think it was even a possibility. So she was the funny one. Of course, my whole family, was really excited. It was, Canadian Thanksgiving that following weekend. My sister had gone to the trouble to make a banner she had found a picture of the 3 women that had won and got permission to use it and made this banner for our family celebration and had us all be photographed in front of this banner. So she's, other than my husband's my #1 fan now, and my sister's #2, but my brother, who always probably thought he was the successful one in the family, really jumped on board as well. So my family's been great. I got 1,500 emails from everybody all the way back to my elementary school friends that day. And when I went to the first press conference, I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I didn't even know what was happening. I didn't even get dressed up for it, which I felt really bad, and said a little prayer to my mother saying, I know you taught me better. I should be better dressed for this. But then one of my colleagues stood up to say how proud the whole department was. And then that's when I saw my whole department sitting there at the press conference, and it almost brought me to tears. I told Rob, I said, you almost brought me to tears speaking about it. So everybody I knew just was super excited. It was really
That's so interesting to see. Kind of, it's a process you don't really, I guess you don't expect. Had you ever prepared? Had you maybe expected, I might win a Nobel Prize, so here's what I would do, here's who I would text when I win it? Or is this really something, until you get the call at 5 a.m, you just don't ever think about it?
I certainly never thought I would get it. There was talk, over the years whether CPA would win. But again, the grad student it's very rare for the grad student to win. And so, I thought maybe Gerard would win. I remember taking a picture. There was, I think it was Gerard's birthday, 70th or something birthday. And my other supervisor, Paul Corkum, who has already been on the Reuters list of possibly winning the Nobel Prize, I thought, I've got to take my picture between these 2 men so that if either one of them win or both of them win, I'll be going, I'm the link between these 2 men. So I don't think I ever thought I would win. I thought it was a long shot that CPA would win, and then even more of a long shot that I would win with Gerard. So no, I never thought about it or planned for it. It came right out of the blue.
Wow.
And even I will say that my department always votes for who is going to win. Now, my colleague that works right with me always votes for me, but he's the only one. And so I don't even think, my colleagues were really, I think they must have all been quite stunned that I won.
Just everyone was surprised to hear the news and probably so excited. That's really an interesting part of the story that I think, when we look at the list of Nobel laureates and people through history and that they won and how they found out, it's just a part that I think the general public doesn't really think of as much as how the laureate
Well, and
finds
also,
out.
I think here in North America, we're far worse at it than other parts of the world. We so are into watching the Oscars or the Grammys. We love our entertainment. We probably even know who wins the big sports awards, because that sort of falls under the entertainment business. But science is not entertainment. But there is a 4-hour television show. There is a red carpet. The royal family is there. It is a big to do. They're in white tie and tails, the men. Women are in their ball gowns. So in a way, it's a much more splashier thing than the Oscars. And it is shown around the world. And I will tell you that my supervisor's wife was dressed by Dior because she is on a red carpet. And it is shown in Europe. But here in North America, we seem to be totally oblivious to it. And so I had to buy my own ball gown. No Canadian designer was dressing me for the red carpet. And then I refused to say who the designer was. I went, no, I had to pay for it. No free advertising. But yes, I think here in North America, we really don't hold up scientists in the same esteem that other places in the world do.
Hopefully, or maybe that will change if, there's been a wave of Canadian Nobel laureates. There's been a lot of recognition lately. Do you see that changing, or do you think that's something really culturally inherent to other places that we don't have here?
Well, I think it would have to change quite a bit. I'll tell you another story about when the first time I was in China. I was there to celebrate the 60th anniversary, which in the Chinese calendar, 60 is sort of like our 100. Of their very first optics institute. And it was started by this Professor Dao Peng, who had been educated at Oxford, and he came back to China to start this new institute. And we were taken up onto this mountain. So in the city has 8 million people because China's populous. But on the top of this hill, they have a little hotel. And there is a huge sculpture of this Professor Dao Peng. Now it's a public park, right? And so I, in my very foolish North American way of looking at things, insulted, I think, my host, because I said, well, what do the average people just walking through this park think when they see this giant statue? Are they wondering who he is? And he looked horrified at me. He said, everyone in Changchun knows about Professor Dao Peng. I went, of course they do, because we're in China, whereas in North America, unless it was Einstein and now maybe Stephen Hawking, I don't think we could have statues of scientists up that the public would notice or they would certainly wonder who the heck this person is, right? So it is a very different culture. Again, there was a Japanese person, a Professor Hancho, who won in physiology when I won. At all times for the entire Nobel week, not just the day, the entire week of Nobel things that are happening in Stockholm, there were 6 to 8 Japanese media around him in a circle. Everywhere he went, he was like a rock star, right? There was no one from Canada there watching what I was doing during Nobel week. It would not, certainly I'm sure it made the news back here the day I won on December 10th, and then it was over, right? Whereas obviously Professor Hancho was in the news every single day, the whole week. And people were obviously wrapped with about his process. So now Asia has a very different look at science than we do.
Yeah, I guess having the play-by-play of everything he did, whereas for you, it was 1 or 2 articles. And that's interesting to see. And I guess that leads into the other question I had written down, which is, do you think that your Nobel Prize validated the quality of the Canadian scientific community, of the Canadian scientific work, or has mostly served to encourage it to kind of go further, or both?
Well, I do think that certainly the Canadian scientists, when a Canadian wins, we're all excited about it. I think it does bring attention to the role of science to Canada. I also think it lets our fellow citizens know that we are, at least punching at our weight, and that's really good. I'll say on the other side of it, though, the one story when I get asked about the value of science, I point to Korea always as my go-to place, because They were a very poor country at the end of the Korean War. And they decided that they would put their money into the science. They built a science city, for goodness sakes, where they put a big research institution. They put their government research labs there, the research institutions to train grad students. They had their government labs there. They asked industry to put their research labs all in this one city, and they invested. And now, of course, we're driving Hyundais, we're using LG appliances, we're on our Samsung phones. It is amazing how they've become from a poor country to a rich country because of science. So when I was visiting Korea in 2019, they had a press conference again, because science is so important in Asia. I think I had 11 media people with me, and quite an extensive press conference. And then at the end, they asked if there were any other questions. And at the table with me was the head of their National Academy of Science. And he turned to me and he said, well, what do you think Korea has to do to win a Nobel Prize in science? And I was sort of floored with the question. And I said, don't you think it's more important for your society that you have become a rich country because of all you've done with science? And he said, we would still like to win the Nobel Prize. And you realize again that the Nobel Prize is the prize that says to the scientists, you did well for science, just doing your science, not that it had, well, the Nobel is about helping society, but it still just says to the scientist, what you do is important. It's not that you trickle down and help our economy. What you do is important. So I guess you want both. Certainly, and Korea has done a lot of science, and they've done great science. So let's hope they win a Nobel Prize, because their country deserves it.
Is there, other awards that you think have a similar impact, where countries are saying, even though we've helped the economy and everything, we want to be validated by this award? Is there anything else that is comparable, or is it really just the Nobel that does that?
Well, so far the Nobel will have that, mostly because of the history, right? I mean, the most surreal moment of the whole Nobel week is when they ask you to sign the register. And before you do that, they show you the others. And for all physicists, they start with Albert Einstein's signature. And then for me, they showed me Marie Curie's and Maria Goeppert-Mayer's as the other women. Then they let you look through the whole book. But then you're left going, how am I signing the same book as these incredible people? Now, of course, the book has other names that I don't remember, and that's where I'll fall into. But it's still surreal that you're put in that club. So this is what the newer prizes don't have. They don't have that cachet of having Albert Einstein also win it in physics. But of course, the Breakthrough Prize has more money behind it now. And so it will climb. I'm sure the Nobel people are seriously thinking about how to make sure they remain the prize, because they wouldn't want to lose that cachet. But there are other prizes, but there's still only one Nobel.
Yeah, the Nobel is the one that people, I don't know if the other ones are covered in the news as much, or maybe in like you say, in Asia and in different countries where science is a lot more followed and publicly known, maybe those other prizes carry a public weight. But I definitely feel in Canada, you see in the papers, on the front page when a Nobel someone wins the Nobel, but not as much when you see the other prize.
I'm sure. I think when Canadians win the Breakthrough, it'll be on the front page as well. But I suppose you're right that everywhere in the world, it's going to be announced, even in Canadian press, who won the Nobel Prize, even when Canadians don't win it. I don't know if it ends up on our front page then, but it should.
To see it, there's more viral videos on TikTok and YouTube and stuff of people finding out they won the Nobel. And you see that even when you're not looking for it sometimes. And I don't think you see that as much with other prizes, but maybe as we try to validate science more and show science more, talk about science more in public, maybe then those other prizes also start to go up in public esteem, hopefully, right? I guess that's the plan.
Right.
And I guess that leads me to another question about the Nobel Prize. And you've touched on a couple things, but has the Nobel Prize allowed you to do certain things that you never thought you would do? And I mean that in terms of, research. Has it allowed you to get better funding? Has it allowed you to meet people who you're like, oh, I'm never going to meet these people? And then now you do, maybe travel, things like that. Can you maybe speak to how your life has changed since you've won the Nobel Prize?
Well, my life has, since 2018, my life has had two big changes. The first was the Nobel, and the second was COVID. Yes, I traveled almost nonstop in 2019, right up right. And I was still traveling nonstop right up until COVID. And then I've been in my dining room. And certainly the way I traveled was quite different. Who I interacted with was quite different. Certainly when I travel, you get treated very differently as the Nobel Prize winner. And so I would be given day-long private tours of wherever I was visiting, and how lovely is that? I was supposed to get to go to Antarctica, which was always on my bucket list, because I was willing to go to Chile. And this is how they convinced me to go to Chile, is that they would put the speakers on a military plane. Unfortunately, the month before we went, there was an accident that actually caused the death of the people going to Antarctica. So they stopped the military planes going. And so I missed out on my trip to go to Antarctica. I thought, I'm going to make my bucket list. But I've also got to meet people that, I would have never thought that I would meet. And it's not like they're going to remember meeting me, right? Because you always, meet the more famous person and remember that. But I mean, I've had an audience with the Pope. I'm now going to be on the Pontifical Scientific Academy. I have yet to go for that yet, but I think that will be exciting for me. But I got to do something that Brian May of Queen runs, and it's a science outreach sort of idea to bring science to the masses. And he uses his musical contacts to do that. And he invites his musician friends to come and do a concert. But along with the musicians, it's sort of, there's Nobel laureates, and there is the other real stars. The Nobel laureates take third place in this one, the Apollo astronauts. Okay. And so there are groupies that just want to see these people who have landed on the moon. And, I got to meet them. How amazing is this that I'm having lunch with someone who's, stepped on the moon, for goodness sakes. So that was quite extraordinary. Meeting Brian May of Queen is extraordinary. Yes, I have these incredible experiences now where I get to meet incredible people, and I get asked to do a lot, far more than I should say yes to, because, at Starmus, I sat on a panel about going to Mars, and I'm going, what does a person who developed lasers know about going to Mars? I also sat at a different one on oceans, and I'm thinking, what do I know about oceans? Nothing. I got to meet Sylvia Earle, who is like the grandmaster of understanding oceans. She was really quite incredible to me. So no, my life is very, very different because I won the Nobel Prize.
That's interesting how you're describing how you're asked to do all these different things. I was speaking with Dr. Art McDonald this week. We went and filmed with him at Queen's, and he mentioned someone not advised him, but told him when he won the prize, people are going to think you're an expert on everything now. People are just going to want your opinion and your take on all these different things. And that seems to be a similar thing that's happened with you as well, that all of a sudden now you're an authority on knowing stuff. We have a Nobel laureate who can tell us what she thinks. So now let's ask her.
Yes, and it's very hard to take because I get asked about the imposter syndrome a lot now. And I said, well, I've never had it so bad as I have it now, because I can't possibly be as smart as everybody thinks I am. And of course, the other thing that's strange is that I did this work that I'm supposedly now famous for 35 years ago. And people didn't think I was exceptionally smart for having done that, except the high intensity laser community. I mean, I was always held in high regard with my own community. But it's just a little bit strange now that for something I did 35 years ago, now I must be really smart because I did that. So it's a weird kind of feeling. I will say that Art McDonald was lovely. He contacted me right away after I won and offered advice. And it was one of the things he said, just, make sure that, you should be willing to say you don't know. But of course, I'm willing to say that all the time. But then I kind of think, well, don't I want to sit on a panel with these astronauts? So I let them know, I have nothing to say, but I'm perfectly willing to sit on a panel with these incredible people, just, if you want me to. So, I pick and choose, but I find it intimidating.
Well, that keeps you on your toes, I guess, right? Like you're doing new things and exciting things. But I don't want to go off on like a 20-minute tangent, but you're talking about imposter syndrome, and I find that so interesting how you say, you're signing the book and you see Marie Curie and Albert Einstein and some of you for names you forget, and you say, I'll be one of those. But maybe for some people, you'll be the one that they're excited to see. And maybe the Pope's talking right now about how he talked with Dr. Donna Strickland.
Possibly.
It's possible.
There's always that possibility. Yes.
But it's interesting to see, because to hear you're a person and you're someone who won the Nobel Prize, and hearing your path through it, and maybe someone 50 years ago had the same thought of, oh no, I'm an imposter and I'm not as smart as all these other people. And then everyone kind of feels that they're not part. Yeah, I find that so interesting, the way you characterize it and the way you're down to earth about it. And you say, this is something I've done so long. But maybe everyone was doing that. Maybe everyone was thinking, oh, I don't belong in this community as much.
Well, of course, the Nobel Prize, there's only 3 a year getting it, and there's thousands and thousands of scientists. And so I don't care who you are or what you've done. It's also a crapshoot to get it, right? There's going to be through the century that it's happened, a lot of science that didn't get the Nobel Prize, and in retrospect, people wondered why not, But again, there's a lot of weight on the shoulders of the people at the Royal Swedish Academy to decide which thing is it. And the Nobel is supposed to be science that has done something for society. And so it's a different thing. And it's also not a lifetime achievement award. It is for one thing. Whereas most of the big awards are more for a lifetime of work that got you somewhere. So I don't know. There may be some people who kept thinking, I should win. And there's examples of people knowing people who acted like that. But I think those are rarer.
Yeah, I think in speaking with scientists, you often get the idea that science is a community and it's all about the collaboration and the work we all do together. And this recognizes the work, but maybe not myself. But there's obviously in every field, I'm sure you have outliers thinking, I'm the one doing all the work. I'm the one who should be recognized.
There's always going to be the people with bravado. But, when I talk about the imposter syndrome, it gets asked to me a lot because I'm a woman and women think they suffer from it more. And so I usually try to tell women and young women, I don't think so. I think we'll admit it more. I think, it's the old fashioned, now that we have GPS, it's not the same thing. But, I remember walking through a university campus with 2 male colleagues, and we had come from California to Chicago, and we weren't finding the lab we were trying to find. And of course, men refused to ask for help. Okay, it's just, it was against their ego. It was against whatever, right? They were as lost as I was, and they knew they were as lost as I was, but they still couldn't go and ask for help. And I still remember said, okay, men, you stand here and look silly, and I will go and find out how we can do it, right? So, but there's a difference between bravado and really knowing in your heart and soul what you can and can't do, okay? And I think men are taught that they shouldn't show weakness. And for women, we're taught that we are the weaker sex. And so what does it matter, right? Go ahead and just admit that we don't know. And so women should look at that as that we had that advantage, right? I think they see it and they're told that it's a weakness in them, but it's not. It's a strength in them. And all sides need to learn that. It's okay to not know. This is really what scientists tells us, right? Right through undergrad science, we're trying to get them to know what science has already happened. But when you get into the PhD program, you are trying to do new science. And therefore, it is what you don't know that's important. And somehow then it's not a weakness to say, I don't understand it, because we're pushing the boundary. And I think we have to get around that. I think that's one of the main differences we have to bring to science education, that science is about asking why. It is not about knowing.
Really well put. I think that's, and just the way you describe the imposter syndrome being just who's willing to admit it more, I think is really poignant, the way you kind of frame that. We're exactly at 30 minutes. So do you have time for my last question that I have on there, or did you have something to do right away?
No, it's fine. I don't like the last question, but go ahead, ask the last question.
You're welcome to answer it short or not. But the last question being, out of all the research you've done in your whole career, what's been the most rewarding for you personally? But if you don't like it, you're welcome to answer it however you'd like.
I'll answer the question. I'm always very truthful. So I sit now, I used to in the dining room sit at the other end of my table, but now I sit with Alexander Graham Bell behind me. Alexander, it was my husband's grandfather who made the bust that we have the picture of. And his children were not happy with this, saying he looks like a grumpy old man. And he came back saying, I am a grumpy old man. And it was implied, I think, in the article that what he was grumpy about was that he could never top the telephone. Now, I don't know if that's what he really thought, But I kind of thought, I'm never going to top CPA and I'm never going to be grumpy about it. I got to start my career on a bang. And I also didn't feel the pressure that I had to top it, because that would have been a lot of pressure. So I don't think I'm going to top that. But when I'm talking to the students and stuff, and they ask me, what do I remember as one of my big moments in science other than CPA? I remember working with my postdoc. Again, we think he could win the Nobel Prize, right? That's when I had the picture with between Girard and Paul Corkum. And we were trying to solve what was making what's called continuum generation. You put in one color of light, and through a nonlinear optics process, all the colors of the rainbow come out. And they come out with a spatial structure as well. So it was Paul that sort of really figured out what was happening, but he and I had totally different answers as to what was causing the spatial parts. And we couldn't get each other to see it our way, right? And then I finally thought, okay, I've just got to do a computer model, and I hate computers, and it hadn't sat on one forever. And the theorist in the group really helped me. He just let me use his account, and every day there was an error, and he did it. I only did it on the evenings and weekends. I didn't want Paul seeing that this is what I was doing. And then finally he came in on one Saturday and he said, I have 2 questions for you, Donna. Why are you here on a Saturday? And what are you doing in front of a computer terminal? Because he knew that I did not want to sit in front of a computer terminal. And I said, funny you should ask today, because I've just modeled my way of looking at this and it works. And he had to admit that, and so then he understood what I was saying and got it. And I just thought, he's such a brilliant mind. And I showed him something. The main thing was his when we wrote the paper, right? But I still got this piece of the puzzle ahead of him. And I remember being very, very proud of that. Right? There's something about just thinking, okay. The other time I'll tell you, and obviously the way my mind works, is that I was just given a poster about this new 2-color laser I built when I first got to Waterloo at a laser conference. And I had a big crowd around me asking me the questions about it. And so somebody who really wanted to ask me couldn't get in, and he didn't want to take the time. And I said I would do mid-infrared radiation with it. And he tapped that corner of my poster and said, that'll never work. And I went, well, now you've made me want to really do it. And then when I gave the talk about the mid-infrared, I went, I wish I knew who that guy was, so I could then say, I showed you that my idea would work. So I think, I don't know, somehow either thinking, wow, I did something better than somebody you truly admire, or being told you can't do something and you do it. That's what you remember doing more than anything else in particular.
That's awesome. It's like great personal stories that come through it. And I think that's often it. And, I look back for myself too. Obviously, I don't have a Nobel Prize winning career, but you look back at things you've done, and there's huge projects I've succeeded in, but the things I'm proud of are often little small things that I thought I couldn't do, or that I showed me that I could, and helped me move forward with different things. So it's nice to hear. It's interesting to hear that something that I feel is also something that resonates with a Nobel laureate. It kind of validates my own thoughts.
We're all human.
That makes me think I can win a Nobel Prize. Maybe
There you go. Good.
Learn physics. That's step 1.
Well, it could be physiology, or you could write a great book.
Yeah, I have to learn anything. If I'm going to win a Nobel Prize, I have to learn a discipline, because right now I don't think there's a Nobel Prize in history. Not yet. Maybe I'll be the first.
No. Sorry.
Well, thanks for taking the time. Your answers have been really, really super interesting, just in terms of getting to know kind of how you went about with winning the prize, the whole process of it, and kind of your mindset with it. I think is really interesting. And in Canada, being a country, like you say, which doesn't necessarily have science at the forefront like other places, its stories I don't think we get as much. I think we read the article of the science and how here's the science why you won the Nobel Prize. I've read those articles and understood maybe 5% of it. But content like the interview you just did, really understanding what your process was with the prize and with these different things, is content that isn't out there as much, and I think ought to be. So thanks for taking the time, and thanks for being frank with your answers and dynamic in your answers. I hope we'll be able to create really good content for teachers to use this in classrooms and really have students understanding what is a Nobel, who is a Nobel laureate, and what it takes. So thank you for the time.